And for everybody who's with us in-house, everybody who's joining us online, I want to welcome all of you here this fine Sunday morning. And today, I want to talk with you about some life lessons from Joseph. And over through the summer, we've been in a series that I've called Stories of Redemption. And we've been taking a look at some of the classic stories in the book of Genesis. And when you read the book of Genesis, what you discover is it is filled with a lot of very flawed people, and God uses them. That's good news for you and I, amen? How many flawed people do we have in the room? You are candidates to be used by God. And today, as we talk about the story of Joseph, it's hard to give it any kind of justice in one message. Think of it as kind of the thumbnail version. But just to give you some background, remember we talked about Abraham. And God had given Abraham this promise that he would have this son of promise that would come. And through his offspring, a great nation would come and the Messiah would come. And he gave birth, or his wife did, I should say, in their old age to their son of promise, Isaac. Isaac and his wife had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And you remember the story after Jacob's all-night wrestling match with God, that God changed his name to Israel. So when we think of Israel, it really came from Jacob's name being changed. And Jacob had these 12 sons, which is where the 12 tribes of Israel come from. And Joseph is one of these 12 sons. Now, his story begins when he's 17 years old. How many of you remember being 17 years old? I know for some of you, you're like, that was a long time ago. Well, 17 years old, his dad, Jacob, does something that I don't recommend. He kind of plays favorites with Joseph. He gives him this beautiful robe, almost like this robe of royalty. And when his older brothers see this, they hate it. They hate him. They can't even say a kind thing about him. They resented him and just hated him all the more. And today I want to talk with you about some of the lessons we learn from this journey that Joseph went on. And one of the first lessons we learn is this, that sometimes your biggest critics are the people that are closest to you. Sometimes it's the people that are closest to you. So Joseph has this dream. Now, if you read the whole story, it says something like this, that Jacob loved Joseph, and Joseph had a dream. Think about that. Think about this connection between this paternal, this father's love that fostered an environment where Joseph was able to dream. Now, I got news for you. You can actually help foster that with all of your kids. You don't have to just pick one to do that with, right? And so Joseph has this dream, and it's an interesting dream. He has this dream that one day all his big brothers are going to be bowing before him. Now, you guys remember the story of Mary, right? Mary, the mother of Jesus. He gets this word from an angel that she's going to give birth to the Messiah. And you remember what it says, what she did with this information? It says that she treasured this in her heart and she pondered it. Did she go blab it to everybody? No, she didn't. She treasured it, she pondered it, she let God unfold it. Now, Joseph, he's 17, all right? And so what does he do? He goes and tells his big brothers, you guys, you're not going to believe this. I just had this dream, and all of you are going to bow before me. What do you think? Well, they didn't think too much of him. In fact, the Bible says they hated him all the more. They couldn't say a kind word about him. And let me read what it says in Genesis 37. It says, his brothers and his father rebuked him. What do you mean? His father asked. Will your mother, your brothers, and I actually come and bow before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father gave it some thought and wondered what it all meant. One of the things that this teaches us is this. Sometimes your biggest critics, when God kind of plants this dream, this idea, this vision, well, one of the things we learn is you don't need to always go blab everything out, right? Sometimes there needs to be some discretion and discernment. And there are times that when it is shared, don't be surprised if sometimes your biggest critics are the people that are closest to you. And that's exactly what ends up happening here. His brothers become his biggest critics. And so they decide they're going to get rid of this guy, right? So the father sends them off to Shechem, the older boys. They've got the sheep. They go off to Shechem, find some fresh, pasture land to feed the flocks. And Jacob tells Joseph, "Hey, I want you to go to Shechem, check on your big brothers, check on the sheep, see how things are going." And here he comes. They can spot him a mile away because he's wearing this robe, right? And they're like, "There he is! There's that dreamer! This is our chance to get rid of him once and for all." So they hatch this plan why he's coming, that they're going to throw him in this cistern. That's just another name for a well. So they take his coat, take him off him, throw him into this well. And about that time, they see this Bedouin tribe of Ishmaelites coming, and they come up with a better idea. They think, "Hey, why should we leave him here to die? We could sell him to these guys, and maybe we could all go out for cheeseburgers or something," right? So that's what they do. They sell him to this traveling, they're heading to Egypt, these Ishmaelites, and so they sell their brother off, and off he goes. They take this robe, they rip it, they butcher one of the animals, soak it in blood. They take it home, they tell their dad, "Dad, look what we found. This must be Joseph's robe. An animal must have ripped him to pieces. This is all that's left." Could you imagine being a parent and having a bloody robe come home and believing your son has been slaughtered by an animal? All the while his brothers sold him off as a slave to go live in a foreign land. This is what happens when revenge and jealousy creeps into a heart. And it's easy when the people that are closest to you, that should be supporting you in your God-given dream, they should be the ones coming around you and encouraging it and fanning it to flame. But here's the lesson for us, is that when that dream comes from God, that dream can hold you even when you can't hold it. But we got to use discernment, amen? And then here's the second thing we learn from this, is now he's drug off, he's living in Egypt, he gets sold to a guy named Potiphar. Now Potiphar was a high-ranking official. The Bible says that he was a captain of the palace guard. And so this is the household he's sold into. And look at what it says, that Potiphar noticed this. What did he notice? How diligently and how hardworking Joseph was. He took notice of this. And he realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. He soon put Joseph in charge of his entire household and entrusted him with all of his business dealings. Now let's pause just for a moment. If you could, put yourself in Joseph's shoes. You've been thrown in a pit. You've been sold off, drugged to a foreign land. If you were dealt those cards, so to speak, would there be revenge? Would there be a grudge? What would be planted in your heart? We do know this, that Joseph served in this situation with such a heart that Potiphar was actually able to recognize that God was with this young man. He kind of teaches us right here, when life deals you a bowl of pits, rather than sulk, that's a good time to go plant a garden. And that's exactly what Joseph did. And so we got to learn, I kind of think of this as the in-between. When you come to Jesus, it's exciting. And you all know you're going to heaven, right? That's exciting. But then we have that in-between time. It reminds me of a message I did some time back. I called it Faith for in the Middle. And that's where we are. It's in the middle where sometimes you end up with a tyrannical boss. You end up living in your car. You end up maybe with a foreclosure. You end up with broken relationships. And you're excited at the beginning, and we know we're going to be excited at the end. But it's that in-between where he says, regardless of what's going on, dig deep and know that I'm with you through all of it. And we know that the Lord is with us even when the situation is less than ideal. We can still approach life with a sense of character, a sense of knowledge that God is ordering my steps. I don't understand these steps, but I know I've not been abandoned. God is with me through it. You know, another thing we learn through Joseph's story is this, is that you don't want to let sex blind you. Now, we could probably take the word sex and we could put other things there as well, because people get blinded by their addiction. They get blinded by greed. They get blinded by all kinds of things. But in this particular story, I want to talk about this. So here he is. He's working for Potiphar. He's in Potiphar's household. Potiphar sees God's favor. He entrusts him with everything. And let me just do a quick pause, because Potiphar's wife comes on to him. And let me just say this. Joseph and your pastor actually have something really in common, because the Bible actually says this about Joseph. And you'll see it right off the bat. It says that Joseph was well-built and handsome. And you'll go, yeah, totally. That's totally my pastor right there, right? Well, let me continue on. This is what it says. Now, Potiphar's wife began to desire him and invited him to sleep with her. But Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in the entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He's held nothing back from me except you, because you're his wife. Hello? How could I ever do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. But she kept putting pressure on him day after day. But he refused to sleep with her. And he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he was doing his work inside the house. She came, she grabbed him, and she demanded, sleep with me. Joseph tore himself away. But as he did, his shirt came off. And she was left holding it as he ran from the house. You know, a lot of people wonder, well, what's the big deal about sex? And I don't want to talk too much about that. It's a topic that makes people blush, self-included. But let me just say a couple things about that. Where we live, we have a wood stove. And the wood stove, my father-in-law loves the wood stove. That thing gets lit, I don't know, somewhere right about now when the temperature starts to drop a little bit. And he'll burn that thing right up until about June 15th, right? Because he loves it. Loves the heat, the beautiful glow of the fire. Creates a nice ambiance. It's nice. When that fire is in its proper context, where it belongs, okay, in the wood stove. But if somebody came along and said, hey, I got a lot better idea. This fire is actually going to be a lot better right here in the middle of the living room floor. Okay? Well, now this fire that was beautiful, created warmth and a nice ambiance, is now burning the house down. Okay? And context changes everything. Because when it comes to sex, God isn't saying, don't do that. What he's saying is you keep it where it belongs. It belongs in a marriage relationship. Because when you take it out of that context, it creates pain. It creates suffering. It creates problems. And so let me talk with you a little bit about that. Because when you think about it, all the other sins in the Bible, let's just talk about murder for a moment, okay? If I murder here, it's wrong. If I murder over there, it's still wrong. The context hasn't made it right, okay? Stealing. If I go steal over here for this reason, it's wrong. But if I go steal over here for that reason, well, it's still a sin. The context hasn't changed it. But you know, when it comes to sex, context changes everything. When it's outside of the marriage, he calls that sin, something we shouldn't be doing. But when it's in the marriage relationship, he calls it good and beautiful. The context changes it. You know, there's some other things about it that make it very, very different. The Bible talks about how through that act of a couple coming together, there's a mystery that takes place. It's called cleaving. Would you say that word with me? Cleaving. What does that mean? Think of like part A and part B of the epoxy. These two parts that when they come and they're mixed together, you can't separate them. They're bonded together. That, in essence, is what happens in that marriage relationship. Is that you got two human souls that bond together. And it becomes inseparable. And that's why when you're in a relationship and that relationship ends, and if it's been sexual in nature, it creates such a tearing to the soul. And that's why God says it's important that we keep this one in the right context. It's actually also the only activity that has the potential to create a human life. And did you know that humans last forever? There's a lot of responsibility with raising up kids. And that's why the Bible says it's important that that's a big responsibility. And we need to keep that in its proper context. Now, some people, they say, well, wait a minute, man, what do I do? I've already been, sexual with people that aren't my husband or my wife. What do I do? Well, what you simply do is you say, God, I come before you, and I ask you to forgive me. I ask you to heal me. And I ask you to restore the pieces to my life. And He will do that. And what do you do when you recognize the path you've been on was off? You come to the Lord, you get moving in a different direction, and you move that way, right? So that's what we do. And so Joseph helps us understand these things, and he gives us some really great insight on how to handle sexual temptation, okay? And you know that Bible verse that says if you resist the devil, he will flee from you? But it's interesting with this one, okay? Because Joseph didn't just stand up and start rebuking the devil, okay? He didn't say to Potiphar's wife, look, we need to pray about this. We need to catch God's heart on this. No, what did he do? He got up and he ran. He really shows us that the right remedy when you're in sexual temptation, it's not just to rebuke the devil and, try to rationalize it and, figure your way out of it. He shows us there's only one reasonable solution, right? Run, Forrest, run. And that's exactly what he did, man. He got out of the house. And this isn't just for single people, because married people are thrust into temptation as well. And every now and again, we just got to totally remove ourselves from that tempting situation. Now, as I said earlier, that principle doesn't just apply to sex. Same situation with the things that may keep you bound, addictions or whatever it is. We need to step back and remove ourselves from those things so that we can walk in freedom that God has for us. So the last thing I want to talk with you about this story, and this is the longest part of this message, is that the process helps you to develop the what? The character needed to carry the dream. It's the process you go through. You're in the process now. You're getting up. You're going to work. You're trying to raise kids. You're facing challenges, right? The process is what helps prepare you to carry the assignment that God has for your life. So Joseph has this dream, and from there, he's thrown in a pit. He's sold as a slave, carted off to a foreign land. He's accused of rape. Now he's thrown into prison, locked up. It appears like the key is thrown away, that God has forgotten him. And you know why he's there? Two other guys get thrown in there. It's Pharaoh's baker and his cupbearer. Now you guys know what the cupbearer does, right? He drinks the cup. He's like the tester of the cup to make sure nobody's trying to give the Pharaoh any poison. That'd be a rough job, right? Well, you didn't kill over. Must be okay. Thank you. And so I don't know what these guys did, but they get thrown into jail, and they're right there with Joseph. And while they're there, these two guys, they both have a dream. They don't know what they mean at all. And so they share it. They're talking amongst themselves. They share it with Joseph. And Joseph interprets the dream. And he tells the baker, he says, hey, in 3 days, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're going to get executed. Sorry, I asked. The cupbearer, he says, well, in 3 days, you're going to be let out of prison and you're going to be restored to your place in the palace as the Pharaoh's cupbearer. But I do ask something of you. When you're released and you're back in that place, please remind Pharaoh that I'm here. Please plead my case. I'm innocent. I'm an innocent man. Well, you know how the story goes. Plays out exactly like he told the dreams would go. The cupbearer is restored to his position, and he promptly forgets about Joseph. And another 2 years go by while he's locked up there in that prison. 2 more years. And about that time, Pharaoh has a dream. And he's asking people, man, I had this dream. I don't know what it means. And about that time, the cupbearer goes, hey, wait a minute. There was a guy, Joseph. Yeah, that's right, Joseph. When I was in prison, I had a dream, and so did the baker. And Joseph interpreted those dreams perfectly. He said that I would be restored to this position, and here I am. He said the baker would be executed, and he's gone. I mean, maybe he could interpret the dream. So they drag him out of prison. Now he's standing before the Pharaoh. Pharaoh shares the dream. Joseph interprets it. And in essence, he tells him this. He says, this is what your dream means. He says, we are heading towards 7 years of bountiful harvest. I mean, bumper crops like you've never seen before. But that's going to be followed by 7 years of famine like you've never seen before. And then he says, this is what I propose. I think you ought to take 1/5 of the crops for the next 7 years and store it. So when the 7 years of famine come, we have what we need to ride out the famine. Well, Pharaoh looks at him and says, that seems like a great idea. And it's your idea. I think we ought to put you in charge of it. So he does. So now all of a sudden, Joseph, who'd been in this prison, falsely accused, thrown in a pit, sold as a slave, is automatically promoted to the number 2 guy in the entire land. The only one with a higher position is the Pharaoh himself. And sure enough, just like he interpreted the dream, there's these 7 years of bumper crops. They're storing it up. And then here comes the 7 years of famine. Now, this wasn't just in Egypt. This was all over. Neighboring countries are experiencing crop failures all over the place. So now where's Joseph's mom, dad, and all of his brothers? They're in the promised land. They're in Israel. They're hungry. They're going to die if they don't eat something. And about that time, dear old dad tells the boys, hey, I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. I need you to go and buy some or we're going to die out here. And so they load up, they go to Egypt, they come into the room, and who's in there? It's Joseph. Now, they hadn't seen him. This is now 23 years since his dream. They hadn't seen Joseph in all of this time. And they come, they don't know it's him. They come and they bow right before him. And they ask for this grain. And Joseph recognizes them right off the bat. He knows exactly who they are. And I'll tell you what, if he'd been nursing a grudge for the last 23 years, they probably wouldn't have made it out of the room. But he actually showed kindness to them. And they had a couple of interactions, and they still didn't know it was Joseph until finally Joseph throws himself before them. And he says, "Guys, it's me, Joseph." You can imagine like all the air getting sucked out of the room, right? They think, "Man, we are dead meat. This is Joseph. This is the guy we sold off." And listen to how Joseph responds to them. "Don't be angry with yourselves that you did this to me, for God did it. He sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. God has sent me here to keep you and your families alive so that you would become a great nation. Yes, it was God who sent me here, not you." Then Joseph kissed each of his brothers, and he wept over them. And then they began to talk freely with him. Then he reiterates, a couple chapters later, "God turned into good what you meant for evil." Would you say that with me? God turned into good what you meant for evil. He brought me to this high position I have today so I could save the lives of many people. I will take care of you and your families. And he spoke very kindly to them, reassuring them. Clearly something had changed in the heart of Joseph, because 23 years earlier, he's saying, "Guess what? You're all going to bow before me." And you fast forward this story, and here he throws himself before his brothers. Wow. What a humility that had come. Where did that come from? Where did that change come? Most people would say, when the brothers are kneeling there, say, "Look, guys, the dream has been realized. There you are. I told you." Joseph wouldn't have any of that. Something had broke in this man. What changed him? The process, the middle, the journey, being thrown in a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused, locked in prison, all of that. And you know what he discovered through every step of the way? God is still here. God has not left me. God has been faithful to me. I think the only way you could possibly hope to have this kind of attitude, given the hand that was dealt to him, is to recognize that God was absolutely a part of the process. Now, Joseph would probably be the first to recognize I wasn't crazy about the process, but ultimately it was the process that was necessary for me to be able to be here at this time, at this place. The Messiah would come through one of these brothers, Judah. What would have happened if in his moment of resentment he had his brothers executed? What would that have done for you and I when the Messiah was promised to come from this line? What would have happened if Joseph had never been carted off to Egypt and given the wisdom and a place of favor to store up grain to save many lives, including the Israelites? See, without Joseph being there, this small nation, this small family, likely would have just perished in a famine. But Joseph was able to recognize it was through the process that God was getting me exactly where He needed me, wanted me to be. In other words, the point is this, you guys. When you are walking in step with the Lord, there's no such thing as a missed step. Because even steps that look off, God uses ultimately to strengthen you, to help break you, and to shape character within you that will be necessary for you to carry the assignment that God has for you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Where you are right now, it may be less than ideal. It's not where you want it to be. The challenge you're going through is not what you signed up for. But Jesus says if you'll just stay faithful, serve with character where you are. Don't just do it half-heartedly because you're thrown into this situation you don't like. Don't do it with a bad attitude because you don't like the boss you're working for or whatever. You stay diligent. You serve with character where you are, because through the process, ultimately what is happening is God is strengthening you. He's shaping your character. He's chipping away your arrogance. He's chipping away your self-reliance. He's chipping it away. So what becomes more evident is God at work in you. And so we must be aware. This is why when we have difficult people, it's like, well, I'm not too crazy about that person, but I know God's using that person in my life. I know He is. Because we know with God there's no such thing as mistakes. Because He will use what even looks like a mistake ultimately to reroute you into the plan He has for your life. Large assignments require large character. Where does the character come from? Where does the strength come from? It comes through the challenges you face in life. You get through one obstacle, one hurdle, faith increases, strength increases, character increases, arrogance, self-reliance decrease. This is what you see in the story of Joseph, a humble man who was able to completely forgive and embrace his brothers and recognize, through it all, what you meant to harm me, God turned it all around and He used it for good. It makes me think of that passage that you hear me quote so often, where it says, God works all things for the good to those that love Him and are called according to His purpose. Who better to help somebody walk in recovery than somebody who's been there? God uses all things. Who better to have compassion and love and care for a mother who's lost her child than somebody who's been there, who understands in a way differently than anybody else? Who better to know how to embrace somebody whose marriage is falling apart than somebody who understands what that feels like? They've been there. Do you understand? Through your journey, there are things that happen that we wish wouldn't, and yet somehow God uses all of it. I'm not saying everything that happens is God's will for you, but ultimately God will accomplish His will, period, regardless of what happens to you. God has a special plan for your life. It's bigger than you know. It's bigger than you. The way you walk into that is where you are right now. Serve with character. You may have this vision of where you're going to be, but you're not there yet. Well, if that dream is from God, that dream has a way of holding you when you can't hold it. And just know sometimes the biggest critics are some of the people that are closest to you. Don't let that bother you too much. Just keep serving with character right where you're at. Whatever's in front of you, do it well. That's what Joseph did. Living in a foreign land, living as a slave, working for Potiphar, and he did it well. And Potiphar recognized that. And even when you've been thrown in the pit, so to speak, sold as a slave, falsely accused, locked into a dungeon of self-pity, God has not abandoned you, period. He's using all of it, good, bad, and ugly, to strengthen you, to humble you, to shape you, to chip away the arrogance and the self-reliance, so that the character that's necessary for you to carry the assignment God has starts to rise to the surface. I'm going to ask if we could bow our heads together as Alex and Vida come. And I want to ask you today, how many of you, man, you're in a rough spot in your life right now? Will you raise your hand up where you're at? Yeah, all over the place. Well, I want to encourage you, you're not alone. God has not abandoned you. He says, you stay faithful right where you are. We're going to get to the other side of this, but just know right now, I'm doing some work because I got a big plan for you. And that big plan is going to require big character. It's going to require big-time strength. And that comes in the trials. Can we stand together? Dear Lord, I pray for my church family. If we took the time and were to talk to everyone in this room has a story. We've all had different journeys, and along the way there's been pain associated with that. But as we gather here this morning and we look back, we realize through all of it, you were calling us. You were bidding us to come. And for those that are in a difficult time right now, present tense, I pray, Lord, that you would help them see what you're up to. You are so faithful to us. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your love and your faithfulness.